Good day to everyone. This is Humphrey Ochige, and I will be doing the problem discussion for topic 6. It is time for us to apply what we have learned about what standard costing can do for us, as reported by my groupmates, and put our knowledge to the test and try to learn more through solving these problems. So let's start. This is our first problem, problem 7-1b. It relates to direct materials and direct labor variance analysis. Let's get into PR 7-1b. Here are the details. Lenny Clothing Company manufactures clothing in a small manufacturing facility. Manufacturing has 25 employees. Each employee presently provides 40 hours of productive labor per week. Information about the production week is as follows. Now we are seeing the various standards for the company in its manufacturing clothing. So let's take it one by one. Standard wage per hour, that's $12. Standard labor time per unit, 12 minutes to create 1 unit of clothing. We see the first challenge here. As you can see, the labor time input is in minutes. We need to convert it to hours later. Standard number of yards of fabric per unit, that's 5 yards to create 1 unit of clothing. So this is our direct materials. Standard price per yard of fabric, $5. Actual inputs and output relating to the company. So actual price per yard of fabric, that's $5.10. Actual yards of fabric used during the week, 26,200 yards. Number of units produced during the week, 5,220 units of clothing. Actual wage per hour, $11.80. Actual hours for the week, 1,000 hours. So now what I prefer to do here after reading the problem is to do some identification. Like I said before, let us identify the various components involving standard costing. Let's do it first for direct materials. Now, under direct materials for computing variance, we need to identify the following: standard quantity, standard price, actual quantity, actual price. As shown in the problem I just read before, we just need to input the details in its proper place. Standard quantity is 5 yards per unit. Standard price is $5 per yard. Actual quantity is 26,200 yards. Actual price is $5.10 per yard. So that's direct materials. Let's move on to direct labor. That we need to find the following: standard labor rate, actual labor, and actual labor rate. Again, we just need to input the details. For standard labor, that's 12 minutes per unit. Standard labor rate is $12 per hour. Actual labor is 1,000 hours. Actual labor rate is $11.80 per hour. And last but not the least is the actual output given. That's 5,220 units of clothing. Okay, that's finished. Now that we have identified the important details in order to solve our variances, let's proceed to the requirements of the problem. So the requirements are the standard cost per unit for direct materials and direct labor, the price variance, quantity variance, and total direct materials cost variance, and the rate variance, time variance, and total direct labor cost variance. So we'll use those details later. Let's do the first requirement. The standard cost per unit for direct materials and direct labor. Now this is very simple to solve since we have already identified the important detail. To compute the standard price per unit for direct materials, we will use the standard quantity in how many yards of fabric it takes to make 1 unit of clothing, and the standard price for yards of fabric. So we just need to input the details. That's 5 yards per unit for standard quantity and $5 per yard, and multiply it. And there you have it. We have the standard price per unit for direct materials. That's $25 per unit. Move on to direct labor. We need the standard labor and the standard labor rate. So input the details. That's 0.2 hours per unit. 0.2 hours because, as we have discussed before, the standard labor conversion is 12 minutes per unit. Since the standard labor rate is in a per hour basis, we need to convert first the standard labor rate, standard labor time of 12 minutes to hours. So that's 12 over 60 minutes. That's 0.2 hours per unit of standard labor. Let's move on. Standard labor rate, $12 per hour. Multiply it, and we have our standard price per unit. That's $2.40 per unit for direct labor. Now let's move on to the second requirement, letter B. To find the price variance, the quantity variance, and total direct materials cost variance. Now note that these all relate to direct materials. So let us forget about direct labor for a moment and focus on direct materials. Let us first solve price variance. Now remember that the formula for price variance is actual price minus standard price times actual quantity. So in order for us to solve the problem easier, I have implemented an abbreviation for the formula. That's AP minus SV times AQ. Okay, note that we have already identified the specific details, so let's just input. So $5.10 minus $5 times 26,200 yards. That will equal to 2,620. Unfavorable. Unfavorable. Why is it unfavorable? Because, as you can see, our actual price is more than our standard price. So that makes the variance very unfavorable because we have spent more on materials than what we have uh, set it to be. Next, let us solve the quantity variance. Now remember the formula of quantity variance. Actual quantity minus standard quantity times standard price. So input the details. We have 26,200 yards for actual quantity and $5 per yard for standard price. Now we have a missing figure here, that is standard quantity. Note that above, the standard quantity is in terms of per unit, so 5 yards per unit. So we need to find the conversion of that one of the per unit into yards based on the actual output. So let us try to solve it. Input the standard quantity, that's 5 yards per unit, and then multiply it to the actual output. And we will have our standard quantity of 26,100 yards. So with that, our formula is complete, and we will get a result of $500. Unfavorable. Still unfavorable because our actual quantity is actually greater than our standard quantity. So let us solve the last variance for direct materials, the total direct material cost variance. As the name suggests, it is the total of the two variants we computed before, the quantity and the price variance. So remember that our price variance is $2,620 and our quantity variance is $500. Since both are unfavorable, then we just need the sum of it. So the result is the $3,120 unfavorable variance for direct materials cost. So let's move on to the third requirement, letter C, the rate variance, time variance, and total direct labor cost variance. So as we can see here, these all relate to direct labor. So we need to say goodbye to our identified values for direct materials and say hello to direct labor again. So let us first compute the rate variance. Now remember the formula for rate variance. It is actual rate per hour minus standard rate per hour times the actual hours. So again, since we have identified the components of direct labor, we just need to input the details and we will have a result of $200 favorable. Favorable because, as you can see, in the actual rate, it is uh, lower than the standard rate. So the company actually spent less than what the standard suggests. So we have here a favorable variance. So let us try to solve the time variance. Remember the formula for time variance? It is actual direct labor hours minus standard direct labor hours times standard rate per hour. We have here the formula and then the details. Okay, we see here a missing figure in terms of the standard labor hours. Because the problem has only given us a conversion of direct labor hours into units. So what is missing here is its total standard direct labor hours relating to the actual output of 5,220 units. So simple to solve, we just need to multiply them. So what is given? 0.2 hours per unit, the result of 12 over 60 minutes when converted to hours, and the actual output of 5,220 units. Multiply, and then we have our total standard direct labor hours relating to the actual output. It is 1,044 hours. So fill in the missing information. And now we have our direct labor time variance of $528. Favorable. Favorable because the company actually utilized lower hours compared to what the standard suggests, which is 1,044 hours. Okay, let's move on to our last variance relating to direct labor and with regard to our last requirement. So the total direct labor cost variance, it is actually more or less the same of the total direct materials cost variance. Remember the formula of total direct labor cost variance? It is the total of the previously computed time variance and labor rate variance. So recall the rate variance is $200, while the time variance is $528. Since both are favorable, we just need to total it. The result is $728 favorable variance for direct labor. Now, you might be wondering why. When we compute for the variance relating to direct materials, it results to an unfavorable variance. And when we compute the variance for direct labor, it is favorable. Now, herein lies the 50% doing standard costing, the interpretation. In order for us to learn more about interpretation, try to see our succeeding uh, problem discussion videos. So that will be all. This is Humphrey Ochigi. Thank you for tuning in.